Well, welcome back. This is going to be the first of 3 videos exploring Chapter 10, where we look at risk assessment techniques. And what we're going to be doing during this particular video is starting to look at the differences between operational, project-based, and third-party assessments. So that's where we're going to focus our time during this particular video. These are the lesson objectives that we're going to use for the entire chapter. So not only are we going to look at those assessments, we'll look at the FRAP project-based review or risk framework, and then we'll get into questionnaires and the advantages and disadvantages of that when you've got a third-party assessment going on, because you've got some unique challenges associated with that. All right, so let's start off with looking at these categories of risk assessments. There are actually 3. First of which, and we'll spend some time on, is this idea of operational assessments. These are ongoing all the time, and you've got a variety of different techniques to deal with those emerging threats, new vulnerabilities that's been released, or where people have violated the standard and you've got compliance issues. The second is a project. You've got a new project, you're rolling out a new system, and so they're going to have very finite duration just for the duration of that particular project. And then finally, you've got to assess your third-party partners, and how do you do that, and what mechanisms do you use for those third-party assessments. All right, let's start at the top. Let's look at those operational risk assessment tasks and techniques. And you can see through that list of tasks, there's a lot going on in that ongoing assessment of the organization. So these operational assessments are going on all the time. You've got a portion of your either risk or security teams looking at threat analysis, scanning for vulnerabilities, remediating patches, doing some form of penetration testing within the organization. When incidents occur, you've got to prioritize those and handle those very quickly. For your policies, you've got to process exceptions on those policies. Double check compliance to standards, that people are actually following the policies that are in place. Going in and certifying and accrediting IT systems. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in this video. Responding to audits, both internal and external. Responding to clients when they raise issues. Vendors want to come on and do on-site reviews, and then you may have to go and look and see if you've got a gap between the regulatory bodies, what they're asking for, and then what you're actually doing. Lots of different techniques for doing these things. A questionnaire and interview are some of the mechanisms. You can have passive testing, active testing, and go in and actually start building a certification or accreditation of your underlying IT systems. So again, as you look at this pretty daunting list of what that risk management or security team is going to be doing on an operational basis day to day. If we look at some of those tools, questionnaires, lots of things can happen. It's hard to build a questionnaire where folks don't do one of the 5 things below, where they skip the question, just routinely select not applicable, give up on it, answer no to be safe because they don't know, or I have some mechanism for asking for clarification, but then that means that the questionnaire, you're going to have to do it again. And so building these things are difficult. It is a passive form of interview, but you can get to a large number of folks and you can pull in a large amount of information. Interviews, got to be careful with those. They can work poorly in an unhealthy or defensive environment. They work well where there's a healthy disagreement ongoing, and ideally they rapidly narrow the conversation to ground truth in the real situation. That's what happened in this scene from Office Space. They came to a shared agreement on the ground truth and the real situation, except with perhaps the leadership potential of this particular employee. So while they agreed on the facts, they drew the wrong conclusion. So interviews can work extremely well. It takes a bit of time to actually execute within the organization. It can lead to a chicken and egg conversation. Do you do the interview first and then the questionnaire, or do you do the questionnaire first to inform the interview? And candidly, it depends on the organization and what's going on within that organization, its culture, to decide which is going to provide the best result. That, of course, depends on some wisdom and judgment of assessing the situation that the organization finds itself in. All right, we've got an in-class exercise here, but this is a video, so we're going to skip that in-class exercise and move on to talk about some operational techniques in the form of active and passive testing. So we've talked about interviews, we've talked about questionnaires. Now we're going to talk about actually going out and using some of these tools. So there are lots of tools out there that can do vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, wireless security assessment, or black box application testing. And in fact, there's a link there to the top 125 security tools that you could potentially use. And I previously mentioned only the active tests. There are lots of passive tests that can be done as well. Again, you want to have these tools used in your environment. They do impact the environment. In other words, they can generate a denial of service attack on your environment. So Nessus, for example, typically is run about 2 o'clock in the morning. It may be run on the weekend. It's very good at catching vulnerabilities and machines that are not patched. But having said that, you don't want to be running it at 8 o'clock in the middle of your workday because it will definitely impact your environment as it goes out to every possible IP address and tries to determine the vulnerabilities associated with that particular machine. All right, very good. Yep, we got another in-class exercise. Again, if you were in the class, we'd break into groups and go look at each of those tools and have the groups brief back. But we're not in class. We're in a video. So we're going to keep on going. We've talked about those operational techniques, and now we're going to talk about third-party reviews. So if you've got an arrangement with a third party and they're handling your services, remember, you still will be held accountable. You still will be fired if there's a security incident. And so there are kind of 3 approaches that the book talks about. The best approach that really seldom happens is you get to visit their security operations center or you do a penetration test on them. I will tell you, Microsoft or Google or Amazon is not going to allow you to do a penetration test on their service to assess their security. Not going to happen. But for some companies, you may be able to work this depending on how big of a customer you are and how much you utilize their service. What is a good approach is that they have a independent third-party penetration test done, and that you get an executive summary of that so that you have some indication of the security of this third-party partner that you're working on. The worst approach is where they say, well, we're certified by ISO 27000 or SAS 70. Not so good. It occurs quite often that you get to that not good approach, but remember, you're betting your career on this. If they screw this up, ultimately you are going to be held accountable for the performance of the third party. And I'm not trying to shy you away from using third party or cloud-based services. In fact, I embrace them, but you got to do it the right way. And the right way is to make sure that on a periodic basis, I might argue annually, you're going in, looking at the results of that independent third-party penetration test and making sure that they're continuing to protect your data and your career. And if you can negotiate it, actually visit their SOC and look at and possibly do your own penetration test. All right, last of the operational techniques, and one of which that has been building up a lot of momentum over the last decade or so, is this idea of certification and accreditation. So what you're going to do is establish minimum standards and then that lead to a certification of a system, and then try to keep that IT system, ERP, whatever, certified, that it is within continuing to meet those minimum standards that have been established for the organization. And typically you're doing this, if not on a daily, more frequently on a daily basis, to make sure that there are no changes to the underlying image, that anything that goes through change management is then certified again to not change the underlying security certification for that particular system. So you're establishing a baseline for each system, ensuring any deployments are compliant with the baseline, monitoring your configuration to make sure that that configuration does not change. And remember, as we talked about in the ERP, there are tens of thousands of different possible configuration choices associated with it. And then you're documenting where changes occur so that you can go back and either grant an exception or revoke the certification of the system if it's no longer meeting the minimum standards. So how can you do this? Well, you can create a hash library of the good software so that you have a signature, if you will, associated with that configuration. Run scans to make sure it's still meeting it, and either build a new hash if there are approved changes, or look into who changed something that they shouldn't have. You're going to have to establish what's called red lever, and that means that there's someone within the organization that has the authority by themselves to stop a system from going live or to shut down a system if exposure warrants it. NIST 800-37 is a great reference for this. It has been a focus of NIST to move systems towards certification. And so this is a very important idea and technique in those kind of operational techniques that you can pull off. All right, well, very good. It brings us to the end of the first of 3 videos looking at Wheeler's most excellent textbook on security risk management. During this particular video, we've looked at operational techniques. We'll pick up next class or video looking at project-based techniques and looking at the FRAP risk framework. So keep on studying, keep on learning, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.